Hi and welcome to the club. Our most unusual pairing for you tonight. First up, a book that came out just a little while back, and we would normally give you more time to read, but it is such a blizzard of buzz around it. There's a first-time author, it's sold to 30 countries, that we thought we'd weigh in early with Graham Simpson's rom-com with a difference, The Rosie Project. While our classic, well, it's almost 100 years old, but still one of the most arresting openings in literature. When Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from troubled dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a monstrous insect. And things just get stranger in Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis. So let's get cracking, starting with my friends Marieke Hardy and Jason Steger. Now, our first guest is a legend among this country's younger readers. He has sold some 5 million books worldwide, from the Just series to The Day My Bum Went Psycho, which, let's face it, is probably the most arresting title ever. Please welcome him to the club, Andy Griffiths. And a warm welcome back to our second guest. Now, last time she was here, she was being haunted by Hannibal Lecter. So we just knew she'd be the woman to be up for the monstrous insect discussion. The author of Edition, Fall Girl, and most recently 9 Days, Hands Together for Tony Jordan. And so to our first book, which actually started as a screenplay and was then written as a novel as a way of helping the film get made. Sounds back to front, but it certainly worked for The Rosie Project, the story of a man looking for a mate in the most efficient and least time-wasting way possible.
Don Tillman is getting married. He just doesn't know who to yet. What he does know from his self-designed 16-page questionnaire is she won't wear jewellery, be an astrologer or a homeopath, wear makeup, be messy, smoke, drink or work in a bar. And she most definitely won't be a late arriver.
So, the story of Don and Rosie. Don being a man who is in revolt against the traditional dating paradigm.
Well, he's in revolt because he's incapable of participating in it. He can't get anybody. Firstly, he has trouble getting somebody to the first date, and then it's always a disaster. But
in fact, he's never had a second one.
No, that's right, that's right. And then there's always a problem with ice cream or something like that. But the great thing about this book is that it's funny. It's quite rare, I reckon, to... Andy, your stuff is an exception, obviously, but it is quite rare, I think, to read a book and actually laugh.
Yeah. And when did you start laughing?
Well, pretty well early on, very early on. And the other strength about it, I think, is the voice of Don Tillman. He's possibly, he could be a tad irritating, but you after a couple of pages, I think, you're just in there with him, and his voice is fantastic. Mm.
Did he make you laugh?
A little bit, but I agree that it takes a bit to get into the voice. So the first dozen or so pages, I thought, this is just not going to work for me. I found it very jarring because he's a difficult communicator, and that certainly comes across. And then after about a dozen pages, I almost just fell into the rhythms of how he spoke and his personality. And from then on, I was completely hooked.
It's interesting because, on page 1, he talks about how he's allocated 94 minutes to clean the bathroom and how annoying it is to be distracted from that task. I started laughing from the beginning. Anyone who knew how long it takes to do the bathroom, any man who's going to spend 94 minutes on the bathroom.
Anybody who's going to spend 94 minutes on the bathroom has got to be barking.
Marie?
It was okay. I thought it was a bit cute, and I was reading it and I really didn't like it for about the first third, and I thought, you can't be such a biatch in the new year. How do you find something positive to say about it? So I was sitting there going, what can I say that's kind and positive? So I'm a brand new person on the book show, and thankfully I started getting into it a bit more. But I didn't think it was that funny. Even though I found Don more engaging as the book continued, I thought the plot was far too convoluted, and I find there's somewhat of a cynicism in, I really want this to be a movie, so I'll write it as a film script, and then a book, so the movie gets made. And I didn't like that, the filmic obviousness throughout, so I didn't enjoy it that much, for lots of reasons, but that's one of them. And also, now that it's sold to 30 countries, I can say what I want about
absolutely.
it. So.
And the thing is, on the standards of when you really don't like a book, I didn't like it that much. It's like, praise.
Yeah.
Really. That's very
the brand
gentle.
new me for 2013.
Sweet
I love
woman
you all.
has returned for the
So
year.
happy.
Andy.
I didn't think I was going to like it, but I was into it from page one. And as Jason says, it's unusual to find a book that makes you laugh straight out. And
was it the 94 minutes on the bathroom?
it was the
cleaning?
94 minutes, and then his worry that he would have to rearrange his entire day because he'd lost this 94 minutes. And it would result in an 8-day period, because he couldn't clean his bathroom, it would result in an 8-day period of compromised bathroom hygiene and consequent risk of disease. Someone who thinks like that, I just thought, what a great comic character. And I didn't read it as a rom-com. I didn't actually know I was reading it for the book club. So I read it as a character study of a very odd, he's a stranger in a strange land, looking at our customs. And I just really enjoyed it.
There's no doubt, when you start the book, you sort of know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know how it's going to finish. There are two things that are a mystery, and you know at the beginning pretty well how they're going to end up.
And they
But
are?
it's just how you get... Well, who will be the successful answerer of the wife questionnaire, and who will be Rosie's father, who will turn out to be Rosie's real
And
father.
didn't you think that who was Rosie's father was a matter of really just
I found
something
that
else to kick the
that was a
plot along?
subplot. I knew Rosie was going to end up with him right from the start.
Yeah.
But I was going, okay, let's see how he's going to do this. A man with a high degree of autism and the craziest woman in the world.
Yeah.
She doesn't answer any of his questionnaires. I read it as a writer too, and I got a lot of enjoyment out of it. Going, how is he going to marry these two and get them together?
There's also one really gorgeous thing, and that is that Simpson allows the reader to know more than Don.
Yeah.
And when that's in the first person, so it's a completely first person, you're completely in his head the whole way through, yet the reader is knowing things that Don doesn't. And that's from the very beginning. I mean, people are implying that Don has Asperger's and Don doesn't get it, and there's a bit where he's alone with a baby to take a DNA sample. It's kind of confused, but you know what the mother is thinking, and Don doesn't.
And she asks him, do you have anything to do with the scout?
Yeah, and you can see what this woman is thinking, and Don is oblivious. I think that's a really special skill when you give the reader space to think separately from your first-person narrator and move around inside those characters' minds. I think it's a great skill.
I think it's a huge part of what makes Don an endearing character, actually. And I think when someone says, someone in his computer department or whatever it is a little bit Asperger's, and Don says, yeah, I can think of that person.
Yeah, that's right.
No, they mean you, Don.
Yeah, they mean you.
I wasn't sure. I got confused,
No.
but I thought his friends were I thought he was part of their research project at some point. I got really confused as to why, if people were trying to hint to him that he had this, and that's why they put him in charge of all the kids who had autism. And
You read the whole of Moby Dick, which is a really complicated book, and you can't follow the plot of the Rosie Project.
It's never the fault of the reader. It's never the fault of the reader. And also, I think that, look, I appreciate what you're saying, is that when there's a first-person narrative, it can be very restrictive, and there were sort of outside elements. I thought some of the jokes, I found that joke about the woman going, is this man a sex offender? And there was a really tiresome one where he turned up at a bar with lots of men in moustaches and leather. Do you know what sort of bar this is? That was done in Police Academy, that joke, the Blue Oyster Bar. That turning up at a bar going, why is everyone man wearing leather chaps? I thought some of those jokes were very tired and
was about
obvious.
3 lines in this.
Well,
in the lead up to that scene.
and I also didn't. I didn't like the woman asking all the questions. I thought that was a bit heavy-handed.
Which woman
sometimes.
asking all the questions?
The woman who had the child asking if he was in Scouts.
You're getting fixated on the tiny little thing.
Why is everyone picking on me? That's what I'm here for.
You both write comic books. How easy is it to write funny?
It's incredibly difficult. It's the restraint that's involved to understand the level that you need to step back and let the the jokes stand by itself. That's what I think this book does so well.
And I admired the character who goes to the end of the line for her. He's pushed physically, emotionally, and I love how his seemingly disability turns him into the world's greatest cocktail maker.
Yes.
That's
His
a good
triumphant
scene,
scene
yeah.
at the cocktail party. It's wonderful. Partly what I liked about the book is I did relate to Don Tillman to a disturbing degree. When I was reading it, he's got his standardised meal system. He's worked out exactly what he wants to eat every single night. He can go to the market, get the exact ingredients every week. No waste, no wondering what's for dinner. He's got it all down. I picked it up and said to my wife, Jill, someone else has put my idea down. And she looked at me and said, I would rather kill myself than eat like that.
So are you a lobster on a Tuesday night?
Oh, no, I'm not lobster. I did have a period as a struggling writer where I was living on a food budget of $20 a week. Mine was more, my weekly food budget was 14 chicken wings, 7 carrots, 7 potatoes. I'm saying too much now.
It is that thing about the turning what is seen as a disability into a plus, though, isn't it? I mean, he is such a lovable character in the end, I thought.
And that is such a wonderful thing about this book, is that it doesn't show... I mean, certainly he's very amusing the way he interacts with the world, but it's not just the entirety of him as a character, that sort of diagnosis. He's very knowledgeable about wine. He loves his push pike. He's got other things going on. He's not just a walking cliche of tics and problems. It shows...
In fact, he doesn't think he's got a problem.
No, but it shows a complexity of people, and that's the kind of character you want to see more of in books. Every single rom-com seems to be this strange breed of women who are incredibly competent at their complicated day jobs and completely clueless in their private lives. And it's wonderful to see different people reflected.
And time to look at what else we've been reading over this past month. I'll start with you, Marie.
Well, I'm relating to my grumpy compadre, Howard Jacobson. This Zoo Time, this is so funny. I read the Finkler question, the one that won the Booker. It was okay, I liked it. I bought the collection of his columns, which I haven't read yet, and someone told me that I should read this. I do fear that if you don't work directly in publishing or the book industry, you might not find it as enjoyable as people who are, because it's pretty much about the death of the book industry as told through a voice that I think is probably very close to Howard Jacobson's voice, a very cantankerous writer of fiction, and there are so many biting digs at the publishing industry and the death of the book industry and books about effing vampires, and I think I laughed a lot. I thought it was great.
Chase.
I've been, amongst the things I've been reading is a book by Dennis Johnson called Train Dreams. Dennis Johnson wrote this huge, sort of slightly bombastic book about Vietnam called Tree of Smoke, which was about 800 pages long, and it was very impressive. It won lots of awards. This is a beautiful little diamond-sharp novella about a guy who's just an ordinary worker in the 20s, and it takes him up to, I think, the late 70s. His wife dies, extreme poverty, it's how he survives and how things are changing around him. Beautifully written, and it's very moving, and it's a really, really fine little book. Train Dreams.
Andy.
Look, I've returned every few years. I return to Gerald Murnane, one of my favourite writers, and I think one of Australia's best-kept secrets, because there's often a perception that he's very difficult and an abstract writer, and that may be true. Tony's nodding. That may be true of some of the later books, but this is his second book, A Lifetime on Clouds, an absolute joy from start to finish. Details the life of 15-year-old Adrian Sherd and his friends, who are all self-confessed sex maniacs, dealing with a non-stop problem of masturbation, which puts them into mortal sin, and Adrian Sherd's heroic attempts to overcome his habit, which he manages to do by seeing a beautiful girl on the train, a good Catholic girl, never speaks to her, but the second half of the book he creates an entire life together. And it's wonderful, and I'm very thrilled that it's coming back into print after 30 years out of print. Text are bringing it back later this year, in November, I believe.
Thank you. You can give up your day job as a writer and become a book publicist. That's a great sell.
He is one of the funniest and most singular talents we've ever had.
Tony.
I am reading Madness, a memoir by Kate Richards. I was one of Kate's creative writing teachers, and I think I'll put that on my resume that I taught Kate Richards. This is a fantastic book. It details a period in her 20s when she was a doctor and she had frequent attacks of psychosis that she'd suffered from since her teens. But it's the writing. It's elegant and poetic and just one of those books that really touches your heart.
I picked up the first page and I'm sort of...
Yeah, from the first page, it's one of those books, if you read the first page, I found it impossible to put down. I finished it at 1 a.m. in the morning because I couldn't put it down.
Well, I've been reading Flight Behaviour by Barbara Kingsolver, set contemporary Tennessee farm, very, very poor country. Starts as Della Robbia is climbing this mountain. She's about to start on her adulterous affair. She's very excited and wearing her best boots, and it seems like the entire forest has burst into flame. And she thinks it's a sign from God, so she runs away. In fact, it's not. It's the arrival of the monarch butterfly migration. And they have, instead of going right the way through to Mexico, they have stopped in the Tennessee forest where she lives. It is actually a global warming book. It is, a book about changes to climate and believing your eyes, and it's really interesting. I think it's the best novel she's done since Poisonwood Bible, and I really enjoyed it. Now, to our classic, and we're back with you, Andy, because it's his favourite, which it speaks to anyone who has woken up one morning feeling not quite right in their own skin, this book. An extremely short novel about which literally thousands of books have been written, searching for the meaning of Kafka's Metamorphosis.
When Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from troubled dreams, he found himself transformed into a monstrous insect. His numerous legs, which were pathetically thin compared to the rest of his bulk, danced helplessly before his eyes. Gregor's eyes turned next to the window. The dull weather raindrops could be heard beating on the metal window ledge, made him feel quite melancholy. What has happened to me, he thought. It is no dream.
This has been your favourite book, I gather, since you were 16 when you first read it.
Yeah, when I was 16, I discovered The Catcher in the Rye and The Metamorphosis at the same time. And they were both hugely wonderful books. But I just loved this because Kafka had taken the very surreal and odd situation of a man waking up as a giant insect. But then he proceeds to deal with it absolutely realistically. No one in the book ever evinces astonishment that this should be so. They accept it completely, that, Gregor's turned into a bug. All right, how do we feel about that? We don't like it. We're horrified, we're shocked, and we're taken on an emotional journey that is harrowing and sad, but is also, if you want to look at it as a comedy, it works perfectly as a comedy. There are great comic set pieces where poor Gregor tries to come out of his room to explain what's going on and why he's not at work. And the chief clerk has come from his work to find out why he didn't turn up at 6 a.m. in the morning. And the chief clerk throws his walking stick away and runs out of the apartment. And his father picks up the walking stick and a rolled-up newspaper and starts stamping his feet and hissing at Gregor to get him back in the room. But poor Gregor can't get in the room because the doorway's not made for a bug. So there's
It's very, very funny, isn't it? That's a surprise, I think.
It is.
How funny
and
it
I
is.
think Kafka is often claustrophobic and frightening and depressing. Some of the pieces of fiction are not happy. But I think in this one, he balances his comic instinct perfectly with his instinct for tragedy. So we end up with this parable, really, that makes us laugh, makes us cry, and it fuels 100 years of speculation about what could it all mean. And I don't think you have to have a final answer for it, but it's just a wonderland of a world he's created.
What does it mean? Well, I mean, what do we think it is? Parable, fable, allegory. It's been analysed, psychologically and politically, in every which way. What do you think it is?
Why do we have to know what it means?
That's right.
I mean, it's what it makes you feel. I mean, Gregor's the original emo, really. I mean, it is. To me, it's a very teenage novel. He's the ultimate hair-flicking, My Chemical Romance listening teenager. Like, no one understands me, I may as well be a bug. And I think it's a great book like Camus to read when you're 16, when that is exactly how you feel. You feel isolated from your family. You just want to stay in your room and have them drop rotting food under the door and just leave you alone so you can have your feelings. I think the analysis sometimes takes away the raw emotion that you should feel when you read it, which I think is everything that Andy described. It's warm, it's funny, it's strange, it's cold, it makes you hungry, and it's about isolation.
It's also profoundly sad, though, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Because this predicament that he's in is ghastly, and because it's done with such sort of realism, you really feel for poor Gregor.
And it's that realism. It's once you accept, or even just move past the opening madness, the opening unlikelihood of a man turning into a beetle, everything just follows so logically, step by step, image by image, and there's no point at which you can put up resistance. You just go with it.
You accept it from the first sentence.
Yeah.
You don't. I think what you do have to lose, and probably as a modern reader more so, is if you haven't written before, I can't wait to find out why. Like I can't. That's you have to once you realise that you're not going to find that out. But I never questioned that he was
because in so much modern writing there's this tendency to explain every little thing, and it's so unnecessary, and this book shows you it's unnecessary, and in fact it moves the reader into more of a head space instead of a heart space. And this book is all about the heart space. It's all about this was the third time I read it, and I was still completely knocked out by this sense of empathy for Gregor, and my heart still goes out to him in exactly the same way it did the first time that I read it. There's no intervening, well, how did that possibly happen? And that doesn't sound right. It's just completely emotional.
Why has it lasted? Why has it endured? Why does it keep... It's never been out of print. It's got incredibly sort of powerful reaction.
There's a really universal thing that it captures, which is the feeling that we all have about sometimes things are outside of our control and we can't communicate to people, and that people don't see us the way we really are. And that sort of trapped in a bug's body, for want of a better phrase, is we've all felt that way.
And you feel isolated, and you don't belong, and you feel you're doing the wrong thing, and this isn't the life you want to lead.
There's always going to be 16-year-old boys that you can give this to. Always. I mean, that's the thing. This would be equally as relevant for the 16-year-old Andy Griffith today, who doesn't want to get out of bed.
It's incredibly modern. In this we have Gregor, who sentences himself to death by hunger. He starves to death, I think, for the good of the family.
Yeah, he sacrifices himself.
It's fascinating to see him. Once he stops being the provider, the family have to go out to work again.
Yes.
And Kafka is quite explicit in showing how the family start coming alive, and
That's right.
the father regains pride in himself, and they've all been sponging off this guy in a way.
Well, there's a lovely Nabokov gave a whole lecture about metamorphosis, and there's this lovely where he talks about that the family are parasites, that they've been eating him up and using him up, and as you will see, the more of an insect he becomes, the more loving and more of a human being. And what Nabokov says is Gregor is a human being in an insect's disguise, but his family are insects in human disguise.
Yeah,
That's great.
They're monsters, actually.
He retains his humanity, doesn't he? He retains his humanity throughout.
Absolutely. And he, right at the very end, when he decides to die of hunger, one of the last things he sort of records is he thinks of his family with tenderness and love. And they're throwing apples at him and
screaming every time they see him.
Hating him, fearing him.
What about the sister? What do we make of the sister?
Now, his sister tries her best in the early days. She works out that he likes rotten food rather than fresh food, and she takes but her care for him soon takes the form of pride. that I'm the only one allowed to take care of
Yeah, there's
him.
still not a great deal of warmth, even from
She
her.
sort of
when she's
imprisons
feeding
him,
Yeah.
even more than he is imprisoned.
I guess so, and there is the sense that he's kind of in love with her, and perhaps this is his transgression.
Just before we came out, Jason said something about the sex scenes, and I was thinking, what sex scenes? I thought, well, you've read it 3 times, so you've probably gone through and underlined all the rude bits, and I've only read it once, so I missed it.
They were just a bit... No, they're not sort of sex scenes as such, but there's a little bit
you
of...
did say sex scenes,
I did say sex scenes, you're right. There's a moment when Gregor, before he turns into this insect, has framed... he makes frames as a hobby. He makes fretwork. And he's framed this picture of a woman in furs, sort of turn of the century Prague.
Page 3 girl.
Page 3 girl, yeah. And so he's got that on the wall. And there's a moment when they're trying to move all the furniture out of his room or something. And he doesn't want that one. He doesn't want that picture to go. And he sort of climbs up and literally plants himself on this picture. And the way Kafka writes it, there is an erotic element to it. He presses his hot belly against it.
It's a hot insect
something like that. That's right. And then there's a bit where he talks about his sister that also I inferred from it an element of there's a sort of incestuous leaning, perhaps.
Anyone else?
My.
An incestuous leaning.
An incestuous. Oh, you're a wag.
I think the story has the ability to be many things to many different people. I think you bring your own, whatever's going on in your life, you'll be able to find this reflects.
Which is why it's lasted, presumably.
Because it signifies
I
so
think
much.
because
it resists
everybody
an easy reading or an easy explanation. And I agree with you. We're in an age where everything has to be explained, and it's brevity. I think you mentioned it's as close to perfect a piece of fiction as you could possibly want, and so it only takes a few hours of your time, and you have mastered one of the great works of literature.
And that's an inspiring thought. Thank you very much for bringing it. It's terrific.
Thank you.
And that is our club for another month. A big thank you to tonight's book clubbers. Thank you, Andy, Marique, Jason and Tony. And next month, this is picking up your reference to the shortness of the book. Next month, this club is climbing Mount Everest. It is the most fearsome, most inaccessible peak in postmodern literature. Or so they say about Infinite Jest, the magnum opus by the late David Foster Wallace. Of course, we do hope you'll accompany us on our Death or Glory campaign, but at the very least, you'll know what all the fuss is about. Our fellow travellers will be singer-songwriter Paul Dempsey and author and book club familiar Kate Kennedy. Also, just a quick reminder that in July, you are bringing the classic to the club. We're asking our viewers to nominate their favourite book for us to look at on the show. So please just pop onto the website or Facebook or tweet or write. However you do it, let us know the book you most love, and that will be the book that goes on our July program. So join us for the next club, which is the first Tuesday of May. Until then, very happy reading. Thanks for your company and good night.